Once upon a time, on February 3rd, 1509, there was a great naval battle fought in the Arabian Sea, right in the port of Diu, India. On one side was the mighty Portuguese Empire, and on the other side was a powerful alliance made up of the Sultan of Gujarat, the Mamluk Sultanate from Egypt, and the Zamorin of Calicut. The stakes were high, but in the end, the Portuguese emerged victorious. This win was crucial for the Portuguese because it shattered the alliance against them and made it easier for them to control the Indian Ocean. By doing this, they could direct trade around the Cape of Good Hope, bypassing the traditional spice trade routes that were controlled by the Arabs and Venetians through the Red Sea and Persian Gulf. After this triumphant battle, the Portuguese quickly captured several important ports in the Indian Ocean, including Goa, Ceylon, Malacca, Bombay and Ormuz. This series of victories severely weakened the Mamluk Sultanate and the Gujarat Sultanate. As a result, the Portuguese Empire grew rapidly, establishing political dominance in the region for over a century. However, Portuguese power in the east began to wane with events like the sackings of Goa and Bombay Basin, the Portuguese Restoration War, and the Dutch colonization of Ceylon. The Battle of Diu was a devastating defeat for the alliance, much like the famous battles of Lepanto and Trafalgar in later years. It marked the beginning of European dominance over Asian seas, a dominance that would last until the Second World War. Just 2 years after Vasco da Gama found a way to India by sea, the Portuguese realized they couldn't trade there like they did in West Africa. This was because Muslim merchant elites on India's western coast were against them. These merchants incited attacks on Portuguese trading posts, ships and diplomats, and even massacred the Portuguese in Calicut in 1500. To find a way around this, the Portuguese allied with the Raja of Cochin, a sworn enemy of Calicut. The Raja welcomed them to set up their headquarters. In response, the Zamorin of Calicut attacked Cochin, but the Portuguese fought back fiercely, damaging Calicut's lands and crippling its spice trade, which was the main supplier of spices to Europe through the Red Sea. In December 1504, the Portuguese destroyed the Zamorins' yearly merchant fleet, which was headed to Egypt loaded with spices. When King Manuel I of Portugal heard about these events, he decided to appoint Dom Francisco de Almeida as the first Viceroy of India. His orders were clear, not just to protect Portuguese trading posts, but also to disrupt hostile Muslim shipping. Dom Francisco left Lisbon in March 1505 with 20 ships and his 20-year-old son, Dom Lourenço, who was appointed Captain Major of the Sea of India. The Portuguese intervention seriously disrupted Muslim trade in the Indian Ocean and also threatened Venetian interests, as the Portuguese could now sell spices in Europe at lower prices than the Venetians. Unable to fight the Portuguese on their own, the Muslim traders in India and the Zamorin of Calicut sent envoys to Egypt, pleading for help against the Portuguese. In the early 1500s, Egypt was the main link between India, where spices were grown, and Venice, a city in Europe. The spices would travel through Alexandria in Egypt before being sold in Europe for a big profit. Apart from this spice trade, Egypt was mostly a farming country with little connection to the sea. Venice wasn't happy with Portugal's attempts to control the spice trade in the Indian Ocean, so they broke off diplomatic relations with Portugal. Venice then sent an ambassador to the Egyptian Mamluk Sultan, Al-Ashraf Kansu al-Ghauri, and suggested they take quick and secret action against the Portuguese. The Mamluks, however, weren't very skilled in naval warfare, so the Sultan asked Venice for help, offering to lower tariffs in return to compete with the Portuguese. Venice agreed and provided the Mamluks with ships and sailors. These ships, called carracks and war galleys, were taken apart in Alexandria and put back together on the Suez under the guidance of Venetian shipbuilders. These galleys had cannons at the front and back, but not on the sides because they would interfere with the rowers. The local Egyptian ships, called dhows, could only carry light guns. The Mamluk Sultan chose Amir Hussein al-Kurdi, a Kurdish Mamluk and former governor of Jeddah, to lead the expedition. The fleet included not only Egyptian Mamluks, but also Turkish, Nubian and Ethiopian mercenaries, as well as Venetian gunners. Despite this diverse crew, most of their artillery was made up of archers, who were no match for the Portuguese cannons. In November 1505, the fleet of 1,100 men left Suez. They were instructed to strengthen the defences of Jeddah against a potential Portuguese attack and to deal with rebellions around Suakin and Mecca. They had to wait out the monsoon season on the island of Camaran and then landed in Aden at the southern tip of the Red Sea. There they got involved in local politics with the Tahirid Emir, which cost them time and resources. Finally, in September 1507, they reached Diu, a city at the mouth of the Gulf of Cambat. This journey, which could have taken just a month at full sail, ended up taking much longer due to these delays. When the Portuguese arrived in India, the Gujarati were the main long-distance traders in the Indian Ocean, acting as important middlemen in trade between Egypt and Malacca, dealing mostly in cloth and spices. In the 15th century, the Sultan of Gujarat appointed Malik Ayaz, a former bowman and slave of possible Georgian or Dalmatian origin, as the governor of Diu. Malik Ayaz was a shrewd and practical ruler who transformed Diu into the main port of Gujarat, which the Portuguese called Cambaia. It became a key trading hub between India and the Persian Gulf. Malik Ayaz managed to keep the peace with the Portuguese through a policy of appeasement and cooperation until one day Hussein unexpectedly sailed into Diu. Although Malik Ayaz welcomed Hussein, he noticed that, apart from the Zamorin of Calicut, no other Indian rulers were willing to stand against the Portuguese as the Muslim envoys to Egypt had promised. Realizing the Portuguese had a powerful navy that he did not want to anger, Malik Ayaz found himself in a difficult position. He couldn't reject Hussein, fearing backlash from the Sultan of Gujarat and Hussein's own forces now in the city. Trapped between two powerful forces, Malik Ayaz decided to support Hussein, but only with caution. In March 1508, Hussein and Ayaz sent their fleets south, where they met Portuguese ships in the harbour of Chaul for a 3-day naval battle. The Portuguese were led by Lourenço de Almeida, who was in charge of loading Allied merchant ships and escorting them back to Cochin. At first, the Portuguese thought Hussein's ships were from their own fleet, led by Afonso de Albuquerque, but they quickly realized their mistake when the fighting started. The battle was tough, and although the Muslims managed to sink the Portuguese flagship, they suffered heavy losses. This made it impossible for them to continue to Cochin, the Portuguese headquarters. Hussein barely survived the battle, partly because Malik Ayaz was reluctant to fight. The Portuguese fleet mostly escaped, and Hussein had no choice but to retreat to Diu with Ayaz, preparing for a likely Portuguese counterattack. Hussein reported back to Cairo, calling it a great victory, but the Mirat Sikandari, a Persian account from the time, described it as a minor skirmish. Among those killed was Lourenço, the viceroy's son. Despite Malik Ayaz's efforts to find his body, it was never recovered. When Dom Francisco de Almeida heard in Cochin that his only son had died, he was devastated. He shut himself in his quarters for 3 days, refusing to see anyone. Despite the serious threat posed by a Mamluk fleet in India, the viceroy was determined to avenge his son's death at the hands of Mirochem. He is said to have declared, "He who ate the chick must also eat the rooster or pay for it." However, the monsoon season was approaching, bringing storms that would make navigation in the Indian Ocean impossible until September. Dom Francisco had to wait until then to call back all available Portuguese ships for repairs and gather his forces in Cochin. Before they could set out, Afonso de Albuquerque arrived in Cananore on December 6, 1508, with orders from the King of Portugal to replace Almeida as governor. Dom Francisco had a personal grudge against Albuquerque, who had been sent to the Arabian coast to block Muslim ships from entering or leaving the Red Sea, but Dom Francisco was so fixated on avenging his son's death that he refused to step down, even though this meant defying royal orders. He continued to rule Portuguese India for another year in rebellion against the king's authority. On December 9th, the Portuguese fleet set sail for Diu. The Portuguese set sail from Cochin and made their first stop at Calicut, hoping to catch the Zamorin's fleet, but it had already left for Diu. They then anchored in Batakala to settle a dispute between the king and a local Hindu privateer named Timoja, who was an ally of the Portuguese. In Honavar, they met Timoja himself, who shared information about enemy movements with the viceroy. While there, the Portuguese galleys destroyed a fleet of raiders from Calicut. At Anjadiva, they stopped to get fresh water, and Dom Francisco had a meeting with an envoy of Malik Ayaz, though what they discussed is unknown. During their stay, they were unexpectedly attacked by ships from the city of Dabul. After leaving Anjadiva, the Portuguese set sail to Dabul, a key port city controlled by the Sultanate of Biapur. The captain of the ship, São Miguel, Paio de Souza, decided to explore the harbour and landed there. Unfortunately, he was ambushed by about 6,000 men and killed, along with some other Portuguese. 2 days later, the viceroy led his heavily armed troops ashore and launched a fierce attack, defeating the soldiers stationed by the riverbank. In retaliation for the ambush, the viceroy ordered Dabul to be completely destroyed. The city and nearby settlements were burned down, and almost all the people, along with their cattle and even stray dogs, were killed. This brutal attack became so infamous that it gave rise to a saying on the western coast of India, "May the wrath of the Franks befall you," referring to the fearsome reputation of the Portuguese. From Dabul, the Portuguese sailed to Chaul. There, Dom Francisco told the town's governor to prepare a tribute for when they returned from Diu. As they moved toward Mahim, near Bombay, they found the town empty. At Bombay, Dom Francisco received a letter from Malik Ayaz. Knowing his city was in danger, Malik Ayaz tried to calm the viceroy. He wrote that he had prisoners and that his son had fought bravely. He even included a letter from the Portuguese prisoners saying they were well treated. The viceroy, Dom Francisco, replied to Malik Ayaz, whom the Portuguese called Meliqueas, with a polite but threatening letter. He declared his intention for revenge, stating they should gather all their forces and prepare to fight, or he would destroy Diu. He wrote,
"I, the viceroy, say to you, honored Meliqueas, captain of Diu, that I go with my knights to this city of yours to take the people who were welcomed there, who in Chaul fought my people and killed a man who was called my son. I come with hope in God of heaven to take revenge on them and on those who assist them. And if I don't find them, I will take your city to pay for everything, and you, for the help you have done at Chaul. This I tell you so that you are well aware that I go, as I am now on this island of Bombay, as he will tell you, the one who carries this letter."
In the 10 months between the Battle of Chaul and the Battle of Diu, a lot happened on the Muslim side. Hussein took the opportunity to fix up his ships and managed to recover a straggling carrack, adding 300 more men to his forces. However, things weren't going well between Hussein and Ayaz. Hussein realized that Ayaz was being deceitful, especially since Ayaz had taken custody of the Portuguese prisoners from the Battle of Chaul, whom Hussein had planned to send back to Cairo in a gruesome manner. Hussein was also struggling financially and couldn't pay his remaining troops. Desperate, he had to pawn his own artillery pieces to Ayaz. He didn't leave for Egypt, likely because he was either hoping for reinforcements or fearing the Sultan's reaction if he returned empty-handed. Ayaz was in a tough spot too. If he helped Hussein, he risked his city and his life. But if he turned against Hussein, the Sultan might have him executed. Hussein himself faced a dire choice. If he stayed, he risked annihilation by the Portuguese. If he retreated, he risked execution by the Sultan of Egypt. Both men were in a difficult position as they faced the Portuguese forces. The Mamluks, the rulers of Gujarat, and the seafarers from Calicut joined forces. Leading them was a man named Amir Hussain, who commanded 6 large Mediterranean carracks and 6 galleys. From the town of Diu, Malik Ayaz brought 4 sturdy carracks, and Sidi Ali added 30 light and swift galleys from the same place. Not to be outdone, Kunjali Marakar from Calicut contributed between 70 and 150 nimble warboats. Together they formed a formidable force ready for battle on the open water. The mighty Portuguese fleet consisted of various ships. Leading the fleet was the Viceroy's flagship, Flor de Mar, captained by João da Nova. Alongside it were 4 other large ships, Espirito Santo with Nuno Vaz Pereira at the helm, Belém commanded by Jorge de Melo Pereira, Rey Grande led by Francisco de Tavora, and Taforeia Grande with Pero Barreto de Magalhães as captain. This fleet also included 4 smaller ships, Taforeia Pequena, captained by Garcia de Sousa, Santo Antonio led by Martim Coelho, Rey Pequeno commanded by Manuel Teles Barreto, and Andorinha under Dom Antonio de Norona's leadership. Adding to the fleet were 4 square-rigged caravels, Flor de Rosa with Antonio do Campo as captain, Espera commanded by Felipe Rodriguez, Conceição led by Pero Cao, and Santa Maria da Ajuda with Rui Soares at the helm. There were also 2 other caravels, Santiago captained by Luis Preto and another ship with Alvaro Pesanha. 2 galleys, São Miguel commanded by Diogo Pires and São Cristóvão led by Paio Rodrigues de Sousa accompanied the fleet. Lastly, there was 1 brigantine called Santo Antonio, captained by Simão Martins, and so this grand fleet sailed together, each ship with its own captain and ready for battle. On February 2nd, 1509, the Portuguese sailors spotted the city of Diu from the top of their ships. As they got closer, Malik Ayaz, the local leader, pulled his troops back from the city, leaving Hussein in charge. Hussein sent out small ships to bother the Portuguese fleet before they could recover from their long journey, but these ships stayed within the safety of the fortress's cannons. As night came, the Muslim fleet retreated into a channel, while the Portuguese viceroy called his captains together to plan their next move. When morning arrived, the Portuguese saw that the Muslims had decided to use the harbour of Diu, protected by a fort, to their advantage. They had tied their large ships and galleys together near the shore, waiting for the Portuguese to attack, giving up the chance to strike first. The Portuguese planned to divide their forces into 4 groups. One group would board the Mamluks' large ships after bombarding them, another would attack the stationary Mamluk galleys from the side, a bombardment group would support the rest of the fleet, and the flagship would stay back to direct the battle and provide firepower. A small ship called Santo Antonio would ensure communication between the groups. Santo Antonio sailed through the fleet, delivering a speech from the viceroy. He explained why they were fighting the enemy and promised rewards for victory: the right to loot, knighthood for all soldiers, nobility for the knights, pardons for criminals, and freedom for slaves who were freed within a year. The wind changed direction, and by 11 in the morning the royal banner was raised on the Flor do Mar, followed by a single cannon shot to signal the beginning of the battle. With a loud war cry, the Portuguese forces began their advance. Leading the way was the galley São Miguel, testing the waters of the channel. Before the ships engaged directly, both sides unleashed a heavy bombardment. In the calm waters of Diu's harbour, the Portuguese used a clever gunnery tactic. They fired their cannons at the water so the cannonballs skipped across like stones. A broadside shot from the Santo Espirito hit an enemy ship at the waterline, sinking it instantly. Portuguese sailors still favoured their black broadswords during this time. As the ships closed in, the Santo Espirito grappled with Hussein's flagship. Rui Pereira and his men leapt onto the enemy ship, and before long they had fought their way to the middle of the ship. But then another enemy ship came to help Hussein's flagship, boarding the Santo Espirito from the other side. The Portuguese were in danger of being overrun by the well-armoured Gujarati soldiers Hussein had added to his forces. Rui Pereira was killed, but reinforcements from the Rei Grande arrived just in time to turn the tide in favour of the Portuguese. Ethiopian and Turkish archers on the enemy ship's crow's nests caused trouble for the Portuguese matchlock crews. Many Muslim mercenaries fled at the sight of the Portuguese. Hussein had expected the Portuguese to focus all their forces on grappling, so he kept his smaller oarships back to ambush them from behind. However, João da Nova, commanding the Flor do Mar, blocked the channel entrance, trapping the oarships. This compact group of oarships became an easy target for Portuguese gunners, who disabled many and blocked the path for others. Unable to break through, the Zamorin's boats retreated to Calicut after a brief fight. During the battle, the Flor do Mar fired over 600 shots. Meanwhile, the faster Portuguese galleys and caravels attacked the enemy's stationary galleys from the side. Although the initial assault was repelled, the Portuguese set 3 enemy galleys adrift with their cannon fire. Gradually, the Portuguese secured most of the enemy ships despite the thick smoke from the battle. Hussein's flagship was overpowered and many of its crew began jumping overboard. The galleys were defeated, and the Portuguese caravels positioned themselves to cut down anyone trying to swim ashore. By the end of the battle, only one large carrack remained, too close to shore for most Portuguese ships to reach. Its strong hull resisted cannon fire, but a relentless bombardment from the entire fleet finally sank it by dusk, marking the end of the Battle of Diu. The battle ended with the Portuguese emerging victorious over the coalition of Gujarat, Mamluk and Calicut forces. The Mamluks fought bravely but were overwhelmed by the Portuguese, who had advanced ships, experienced sailors and well-equipped infantry. Their soldiers wore heavy armour and carried arquebuses and clay grenades filled with gunpowder. The Portuguese also had more cannons and skilled gunners, which the Mamluks couldn't match. After the battle, Malik Ayaz returned the prisoners from Chaul, ensuring they were well dressed and fed. Dom Francisco, the Portuguese leader, chose not to take over Diu because it would be too costly to maintain. Instead, he signed a trade agreement with Ayaz and opened a trading post in the city. Although the Portuguese later wanted to build a fortress in Diu, Malik Ayaz delayed this for as long as he was in charge. The Portuguese gained significant spoils from the battle, including 3 galleys, 3 carracks, 600 bronze cannons, and 3 royal flags of the Mamluk Sultan of Cairo. These flags were sent to Portugal to be displayed in the Convento de Cristo, the headquarters of the Order of Christ. The Viceroy demanded 300,000 gold zeraphins from the merchants of Diu, who had financed the Muslim fleet. Out of this, 100,000 zeraphins were distributed among the troops, and 10,000 were donated to a hospital in Cochin. However, the Portuguese treated the Mamluk captives brutally. The viceroy ordered most of them to be hanged, burned alive, or tied to cannons and torn apart as revenge for his son's death. After the battle, Almeida wrote to King Manuel, emphasizing the importance of naval power for controlling India. In November 1509, Almeida handed over his position as viceroy to Afonso de Albuquerque and left for Portugal. Unfortunately, in December he was killed in a skirmish against the Khoikhoi tribe near the Cape of Good Hope, along with 70 other Portuguese more than had died in the Battle of Diu. His body was buried on the beach. Hussein, one of the leaders of the Mamluk forces, survived the battle and fled Diu with 22 other Mamluks on horseback. He returned to Cairo and was later put in charge of another fleet to fight the Portuguese. However, he was murdered on the Red Sea by his Turkish second-in-command, who would later become Selman Reis of the Ottoman Navy. Shortly after, the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt fell to an Ottoman invasion. Of all the main figures involved in the Battle of Diu, only Malik Ayaz did not die a violent death. He lived a wealthy life and passed away peacefully on his estate in 1522. Thank you for watching our deep dive into the Battle of Diu, a pivotal moment in history that changed the course of global power dynamics. This story of vengeance and justice in the 16th century serves as a reminder of the lengths one will go to for their loved ones and the profound impact such actions can have on the world. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for more historical insights and stories. Share your thoughts on what you would do in the name of justice. Until next time, remember that history is not just about the past, but a lens through which we can understand our present and shape our future. Stay curious, stay informed. See you in the next video.